This video will explain the entire story of the Stalker series, which includes all the 4 Stalker titles: Shadow of Chernobyl, Clear Sky, Call of Pripyat, and the recently released Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl. Throughout the video, we'll follow the story in order and discuss each game's main quest, endings, and many other small details. Although if you perhaps only want to know what happened in the recent 4th title Heart of Chernobyl, then my previous video should satisfy that need. But if you want to learn about all 4 games, then you're in the right place. Naturally, this will include lots of spoilers for all the games, so keep that in mind. As always, like the video if you enjoy, and subscribe if you're new. Feel free to check out my other story explanations like this one, or if you prefer story reviews, analyses, or retrospectives, then I have those as well, all on a variety of games and series. If you'd like to support me further, you can also donate to the Patreon for as little as $1 a month with the link in the description. And so, without further ado, let's get started. So before we delve into the games, we should first have a bit of a history lesson regarding Stalker's main location, the Zone. Stalker starts its story by taking from real-life history, stating that on April 26, 1986, a reactor from the city of Chernobyl exploded, releasing toxic radiation across the land. Taken from the game's manual, it states that the explosion resulted in a nuclear meltdown that would contaminate a wide area, and produce radioactive fallout across the countries of Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia, with faint traces of radiation reaching Europe, the United Kingdom, and even the US. Starting from the explosion's origin, a 30-kilometer circle was drawn around it, deemed by many as the harshest and most dangerous part of the explosion. This area was then given the name the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, often called the Zone. Stalker's connection to real-world history stops right there, however, as 20 years later in 2006, another explosion occurred in that exact same area, at the exact same place. Again, taken from the manual, quote, "The second incident when it occurred was perhaps even more surprising than the first. Of all the internationally renowned scientists involved in the cleanup of Chernobyl, not one would have expected even the slightest rumbling to occur within the massive concrete sarcophagus that had tamed Reactor 4. Not expecting, however, is a far cry from not occurring, and the explosion, when it shattered in the early hours, showed just how shallow Chernobyl's grave of fear was. If the first explosion saw the end of the Soviet Union and the Cold War, the second would see the beginnings of something even more terrifying. The immediate effects of the blast were difficult to observe, even more to understand. But within years, the zone around Chernobyl was starting to attract a group of people, convinced that prosperity lay in its ravaged land. These people, a mixed bunch by any standards, came to be known as Stalkers. The second explosion drastically changed the landscape of the zone. Whether it was for the better or not is entirely up to you. While flora remains harmed but not destroyed, the wildlife of the zone has mutated. Species like pigs, boars, dogs, wolves, and rats have all changed in appearance and attitude. Many have become deformed, and their ferocity has enhanced, seeing anything that isn't their species as a threat. But these are just examples of known species. Other beings like controllers, snorks, poltergeists, pseudogiants, and zombies also pollute these lands. Poltergeists can either control objects not bolted down and use them as weapons, while also sometimes manifesting as flaming orbs that cast spells at the player's known location. Controllers can use mind control to control a person's thoughts and actions. Sometimes this can be used to prevent them from moving, other times they're seen controlling someone enough to shoot themselves. Then there are beings like snorks and zombies. Snorks are believed to be the remnants of the military that was sent to guard the zone after the second explosion, while the zombies are the stalkers of today. Each one has had their brains fried, now just a husk of their former selves. These beings were created when a stalker is exposed to enough C emissions for too long. This causes them to be mindless, simply wandering around with no real goal in mind. But while they may seem mindless, it's clear some level of cognitive thought is occurring, as they can speak some words and operate weapons, although to varying degrees of success. These beings are often categorized under the umbrella term mutants. Mutants are one of the zone's innate defenses, a reminder of the zone's power and how one must be careful when trespassing on its territory. But that's just one layer of defense. The zone is filled with more than just mutated wildlife. Along with the mutants came a flurry of artifacts and anomalies. Anomalies are supernatural phenomena that break all laws of physics. Some of these anomalies can swing you around, toss you into the air, conjure fire or electricity, or could just trap you in a pocket dimension. All anomalies are considered to be hostile and should be avoided at all costs. Should you need to cross through an anomaly though, it's recommended that a stalker carry some bolts with them, as they can easily set off an anomaly from a distance, giving you the chance to run through it while it recharges. So with all that said, why even bother coming here in the first place if it's so deadly? Well, there are numerous reasons one could find the zone as their permanent home. Some stalkers you could talk to explain that they came to escape law enforcement. Others believe that normal life was not for them, and some want to get rich on artifacts. Artifacts are small objects that change due to certain circumstances, mostly pertaining to anomalies, and how those anomalies interact with the environment. These have become a get-rich-quick scheme for those within the zone, as stalkers and traders are always willing to trade artifacts, even to those outside the zone. Whatever your reason, the zone does not discriminate and welcomes all within its borders. But just because the zone is okay with your presence, doesn't mean other people are. Since the second explosion in 2006, the area has been populated with stalkers from all over. Over time, these stalkers have created groups and factions, leading to the ones we have today. The two biggest factions in stalkers' history are Duty and Freedom. Duty was initially started by General Tichenko. Many know that Duty came to be because of the soldiers who were sent into the center of the zone post-second explosion. The group was vastly under-equipped for the journey. The group felt that HQ had sent them there to die. Feeling abandoned and betrayed by their own government, they broke off and formed their own group called Duty. Call of Pripyat clarifies, however, that Tichenko actually staged a communication breakout, which is what caused them to be abandoned, so that he could leave the military and stay within the zone. Their rotten history has been entirely swept under the rug for the most part, as Duty is known as the faction who hates the zone. Their major objective is the protection of life outside the zone, making sure the harmful creatures don't affect those living outside the walls on the mainland. In the long term, though, they also plan to remove the zone entirely. As such, they care little for the zone's secrets as well as its wildlife, but they especially hate freedom. They are the opposite of Duty. They see the zone as an inevitable part of the world that they must coexist with, rather than wipe out. Both factions are essentially the embodiment of order and chaos. Some people aren't willing to throw down their life for a cause so specific though, and just want to live off the land. Those that choose to kill and steal their way to the top will be labeled as bandits. Bandits are generally looked upon unfavorably by just about anyone. Duty, Freedom, and neutral stalkers don't care for them and will even go out of their way to kill some should the need arise. While those that prefer to just take on odd jobs and not kill others would be called loners or free stalkers. These are neutral stalkers with no specific alignment. Individual groups of stalkers may differ on their ideologies, but on the whole everyone considers them neutral in the ongoing wars. They're able to walk into Duty and Freedom bases without issue and are even encouraged to trade with them, as it keeps their stocks fresh. Being neutral does mean that you'll likely be on your own though. Neither Duty or Freedom are going to lay down their lives for you, and the bandits don't care either way. But at least when it comes to 90% of the zone, you won't be shot on sight, which is probably the nicest greeting you can find in the zone. Another semi-neutral faction is the Mercenaries. They are different from traditional loners as they have a patch designating their faction's symbol, despite the fact that both loners and mercenaries are often hired for the same jobs by other factions. Their origin and base of operations are unknown, but they seem to be run by different groups of people. This is likely due to the fact that mercenaries don't have an allegiance and will do whatever is asked so long as they're paid. It is also uncertain what their motives are, as some groups have some malicious intentions, like Black's group of mercenaries in Call of Pripyat, who are only guarding the scientists to make sure no work related to the X-Labs makes it to their base, as once it does, they ambush you. And then there is the group of mercenaries who are trying to sow doubt within Freedom by having one of their men relay them information on Freedom's movements. So it's not entirely clear if the faction has its own goal or if each group of mercenaries has different motives, making them one of the zone's most mysterious factions. On top of this are the two factions who oppose everyone in the zone, the military and Monolith. The military, as the name implies, are the soldiers of the Ukrainian military. They simply patrol the outside perimeters of the zone and make sure no one gets in or out, whether that be mutants or stalkers. The military will almost always shoot you on sight whenever you're nearby, so it's advised to stay away from them at all costs. But quite a few soldiers are incredibly corrupt, as they're easily bribed with artifacts and rubles should you have any. Monolith, on the other hand, are a bunch of religious fanatics who control the innermost parts of the zone. They worship an alien crystal of some kind called the Wish Granter, located in the center of the zone. Their history is much more complex than this though, so we'll circle back to this when the time comes. And finally, while not technically a faction, the ecologists are considered neutral to just about everyone. These people are scientists and professors who study the zone. They usually hire just about anyone to help guard their bases and test out their experiments, and most are pretty much comfortable with their work. There may be specific individuals who dislike the amount of scientists studying the zone, but no faction specifically orders them to be killed. Members of Duty and Freedom are more than willing to help guard the bases, and free stalkers can be seen guarding and helping out as well. Because of the human presence, the zone has naturally managed to work its way into a well-oiled machine. Some people hunt for artifacts, others trade for information, some work as technicians to make sure the equipment is up and running, and some operate as guides, people who master the ways of the zone and can escort people anywhere they want without harm for a price. Each Stalker is also given their own PDA, which keeps track of anything they'll need, as well as the locations of other Stalkers. A ranking system was even implemented to not only encourage competition, but to also help other factions know who they're hiring. The Zone has essentially managed to become a fully functioning entity, almost like a country, with its own set of laws and unwritten rules. So with all that said, let's see how the Zone changes over the course of the series, starting with Clear Sky. Clear Sky begins in 2011. Our protagonist Scar is walking with some researchers near a swamp. It's usually unsafe to travel in such a way, but the researchers are sure that the next emission will occur in 2 months, so they have ample time to get to their destination. Almost as if fate is a cruel mistress, the Zone has decided that this 2-month clock should be sped up as the next emission occurs right now. Scar and the other researchers are caught in the blast, but only Scar seems to have survived. He was picked up in the swamps after the emission by a group called Clear Sky. Talking with the bartender of the group, Cole reveals that the emission Scar survived was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was the Zone's biggest emission. Scar then talks with the faction leader Lebedev, and he explains the nature of their business here in the Zone. Clear Sky was formed to study the effects of the Zone, like the many smaller cells of research groups before them. Thing is, they claim to know more about the Zone than the government and any other scientists combined. They're not interested in turf wars with other factions, artifacts, or money. But the Zone and its people are not going to kowtow to them simply because of their cause. They'll fight if they have to, but they're better researchers than fighters. This is why they've decided to live in the swamps, a tricky-to-navigate place filled with winding paths, dead ends, and many hazards. All they care about is studying the Zone, and they almost had a clear picture of it until a few days ago when that emission occurred. Lebedev repeats much of what Cold was saying. It's the biggest emission they've ever seen. It also managed to change the walkable paths within the Zone. Previously safe areas are now full of anomalies, but once restricted areas are now safe from harm. The emission seemed to have riled people up, as the fragile balance that held these factions at bay was broken, and groups had begun warring with one another to stake claim over the new land. This affects the secrecy of the faction. No one even knows Clear Sky exists, and while they were willing to help Scar, he can't just leave. He could tell someone and expose their entire operation. Worse, because of the changing anomalies thanks to the emission, the swamps are a bit safer than before. So bandits have started moving in, and if they get too curious, they could stumble upon the Clear Sky base. In fact, right in the middle of our conversation, an outpost of theirs is attacked, so Scar has to go in and save them. As he approaches, Scar finds only one man left, while some boars roam around the bottom, eagerly waiting for its prey to come down. Right in the middle of the fight, another emission appears, decimating anything nearby, but yet again, Scar survives. No one at Clear Sky can make heads or tails of the thing, only assuming he picked up some supernatural abilities somewhere. However, as Lebedev points out, he's not invincible to them. They seem to have an effect, albeit a slight one, on his nervous system. From here on, emissions do occur at a random rate throughout the game. Stay outside during another, and Scar will die for real. So while luck is on his side, it won't last forever. Scar naturally then asks the big question: why are there so many emissions? Lebedev explains that the emissions are releases of natural energy accumulated from the Zone, a discharge, essentially. The irregular increase, though, is assumed to be an immune response from the Zone. For example, our body uses white blood cells to defend or repair the body as needed. When it's particularly damaging, the body will make more to combat this deadlier threat. Lebedev sees the emissions as the Zone's white blood cells. Something is attacking the Zone, so it's conjured emissions to fight back against this threat. Lebedev says that the Zone tolerates us in some places but forbids access to others, further saying that what is beyond the Brain Scorcher is restricted. People can't get past the Brain Scorcher, so Lebedev sees that as the Zone wanting to protect itself from the people of the Zone. So this incident to him means that someone likely got past that Brain Scorcher. And because the Zone doesn't like that, it's going to use the emissions to stop this individual. Lebedev requests that we deal with this person, as their repeated attempts to get into the Zone are causing harm to others by way of the emissions. So we stop this person, and the Zone is happy. And when the Zone is happy, we don't die. Interestingly, a future title, Call of Pripyat, will clarify that Clear Sky members Lebedev, Kalinshaw, and Suslov used to be X-Lab personnel. I'll delve into the nature of the X-Labs a bit later, but they were set up around the time of the first explosion and conducted numerous experiments. He used to work at the X8 lab, but they were specifically transferred to X7, which is at the center of the Zone, and underneath a large structure known as the generators. In fact, it's where the pods of a group of scientists called Sea Consciousness are. So it's strange to hear Lebedev speak about the Zone like a sentient being and feigning ignorance when he probably knows exactly what's going on here. So just keep this in mind while Scar finds the man the Zone wants dead. To start our hunt, we follow a lead that Lebedev managed to procure. Someone in the cordon was asking about strange components a typical stalker wouldn't be looking for, so we'll have to go to the trader of the area Sidorovich to see what he knows. To continue operations in the swamps, the guides of Clear Sky will have to escort Scar blindfolded through the swamps, so that he never learns where the base actually is. He'll also have to help Clear Sky fend off the bandits who've recently made their way into the swamps, as again their curiosity could lead to the revealing of the Clear Sky base. The faction currently attacking the swamps is called Renegades. Interestingly, they are the least talked about and least developed faction in the series, only existing in Clear Sky just for this tutorial, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. See, Clear Sky is unique in that it's the only game in the series with a faction system. Since the zone's inhabitants are engaged in a large-scale turf war, factions of all kinds have come out to fight. We as a mercenary can choose to side with any of these factions, making us an ally to one, but an enemy to another. One of these factional conflicts is between the loners and bandits, and yet instead of just using bandits, the game intentionally used a separate faction just for this fight. This means that the renegades and bandits, despite looking and functioning the same, are different in either ideology or leadership. If I had to guess, I'd say it's the latter. The leader of the bandits in Clear Sky is Yoga. So it seems like the renegades are bandits who are joined by individuals who didn't fall under Yoga's leadership or who may have openly opposed him in some manner. Because outside the names, they're pretty much the same. You'd be forgiven for mistaking a renegade member for a traditional bandit. Either way, helping Clear Sky defend the swamps is as simple as going to key locations, killing the renegades there, and then holding that position until Clear Sky forces can come and capture it. Once done, Scar can make his way out of the swamps and into the zone proper, starting his quest for the one who is disrupting the zone. Before we begin though, let's talk about the zone itself. We've discussed what the zone is and what it contains at length, but what about Clear Sky specifically? It's been 5 years since the zone as we know it first began, and since then people have had time to settle in and get acquainted with its land. Factions have been created, wars have been waged, and people are everywhere. So, what does the zone look like in 2011? Well, once the player makes it outside the swamps, they'll enter the cordon. The cordon is the closest area to the perimeter of the zone, as such there is a large military presence nearby. The cordon acts as a beginner's town for new stalkers. Since it is right next to the edge of the zone, it's the first place new stalkers will stumble upon. It's like the tutorial town of an RPG, a place to get familiar and acquainted with the basics before you head out and put those skills to the test. As such, while it's relatively safe from anomalies and wildlife, there isn't much wealth to be found here. Artifacts are practically gone, and most of the abandoned points of interest were picked clean years ago. The only way to make a living here is to either pick stuff off of other people's bodies or doing jobs for Sidorovich, the area's trader. Any information or jobs that come in or out of the cordon go through him, so if you need a place to start, he's the one you go to. Further north is Garbage. As the name implies, it's a massive dumping ground that came about after the first explosion. All manner of technology ends up here, making it an easy moneymaker for those who are into tech instead of artifacts. Unfortunately, the bandits control this location quite heavily, making it very hard to profit off your expeditions. The bandits have each entrance locked down and will ask you to pay a fee just to enter, the price of which is however many rubles you have stashed away. Every time you meet a flock of bandits, you're expected to pay your dues. This will likely cause most players to quick load and then kill the bandits instead, making you an enemy of the faction. If you don't and let them take their cut, you can make your way to the abandoned factory to the north and meet with their leader Yoga. The bandits are a part of a conflict involving the loners and free stalkers. Either by teaming up with Yoga or Father Valerian, the cordon and Garbage will either be run by bandits or stalkers. From here the road splits. To the west is Agroprom. The factory to the north is run by a group of stalkers led by Orest. Orest is quite interesting, as when asked why he hasn't joined a faction yet, he explains that he used to run with duty until they started talking about killing freedom. He believes that stalkers shouldn't kill based on clan membership, and instead should just live their lives. Search for loot, stay alive, he does it all for the love of the game. Further saying that just because we don't share the same goal doesn't mean we should kill each other. There is a difference between going against someone and just going down a different path in life. It's a surprisingly refreshing perspective that you don't see a lot of in this series. To the west of the Stalker base though is the Institute, which serves as the home base of Duty. Duty has managed to hold their own in the region, but they've incurred daily attacks from mutants who reside in the underground areas, making it difficult to make moves even within their own territory. To the east of Garbage though is the Dark Valley, currently run by Freedom. Due to the land, there are very few entrances into the Dark Valley, giving the faction a large area tucked away from most of the zone. But they too have suffered some heavy losses, as their men have been attacked by mercenaries the moment they leave their base. Any attempts to gain ground have been few and far between, as the mercenaries seem to be one step ahead of them. Both these factions are involved in their own faction war. Both factions start with establishing a foothold in Garbage before moving to the other end of the region and into the opposing faction's territory, either ending with Duty controlling the Dark Valley or Freedom controlling Agroprom. Northwest of Garbage is Yantar. Yantar is mostly deserted save for one research base led by Dr. Sakharov. He and the loners he employs for his research are the only living souls out here. That's because the building they've set up next to is overrun with zombies. The doc says that there are powerful C emissions at the factory which turn stalkers into zombies, and it's unfortunately got a really high kill count, because the area is an untapped treasure trove of artifacts. So stalkers from all over come to try and prove they can outsmart the C emissions, only to suffer the same fate as those before them. Further up the road are the army warehouses, where no one seems to have claimed its territory. The military used to have a solid hold over the region, but after the emission we saw in the intro, they abandoned most of their outposts. Once the military left, it was practically free real estate at that stage. Now there are multiple groups of Freedom, Duty, and Free Stalkers walking about. At the top of the region is the barrier, which is meant to serve as a literal barrier between the mutants and Monolith and the rest of the zone. By the time we make it there, however, the barrier is destroyed and abandoned, which explains the occasional Monolith presence within the area as well. And our final area for now is the Red Forest. According to one of the locals, Forrester, the Red Forest used to be a wildlife reserve, Forrester being one of the local foresters back then. He used to protect the area from poachers, but oddly enough, now the area protects itself. Most people avoid the Red Forest if they can, and are willing to add days to their expedition if it means not traveling through here. As Forrester says himself, if a stranger sets foot in the forest, he's as good as dead. The place is crawling with anomalies and mutants. The only people alive are a few renegades who are hiding in a cave and some members of Duty. But other than that, the Red Forest has stayed mostly neutral due to its hostility. There are two more locations that we haven't discussed yet, but we'll get to them in due time. For now, this is the zone in the current day. A melting pot of different factions all claiming their own pieces of the pie, while other locations are better left alone. Your actions during the faction war can change the territory's occupants, as we've seen, but the canonicity of these choices will have to wait. Returning to our objective, Scar will then make it to the cordon and meets with Sidorovich. Naturally, he won't be giving us that info without helping him first. Scar will track down a shipment of his that went missing. According to one of the stalkers involved in this issue, Father Valerian, they used to cooperate with the army. They'd be able to transport gear, equipment, and artifacts through their outpost and get any info they wanted from the army so long as they paid up. The commander of the army was trying to play both sides though, as he was also feeding some info to the nearby bandits, who took two of these guys as men and sold them as slaves over at Garbage. These stalkers then went a bit gun crazy and started attacking the military, even taking the commander hostage. This is really their only bargaining chip, as without him they would have been wiped off the zone by now. So Scar's going to help Valerian and find that loot, so they can make amends with Sidorovich, and so Scar can learn more about this stalker he's trying to find. Scar couldn't get any info out of him, so Valerian just says, "Hey, you know what? What if we just kill his friends? Maybe then he'll talk." To explain, the commander wasn't the only one benefiting from the deals going on between the stalkers and the bandits. He had a few friends who were also making money off this, so they have ample reason to get him out of these stalkers' hands. If Scar kills them, then he'll know that no one is coming for him, and the commander's toast. These soldiers and their squad are located not too far from where the stalker's hideout is. Killing them forces the commander to give up the location, which lets Scar grab the package, helping everyone involved. Sidorovich reveals that the stalker Scar is looking for goes by the name Fang. He was looking for some electronical components. Sidorovich told him to head to Garbage. Listening to a PDA within the location reveals that Fang was working with some stalkers to help him find these components. He requested all of them be found before payment was given, but they couldn't find all of them. So they were hoping Fang was nice enough to give them some of the planned payment for the items they did find. Given their current state, either Fang disagreed or they were attacked shortly after, as one of their men is seen standing on a rock to get away from some blind dogs. This stalker, Vasyan, tells us that Fang went into the Dark Valley, which means Scar will have to work with Freedom to get some answers. According to some of the soldiers of Freedom, many of the men within the faction refuse to go outside the base. They've had daily attacks that have resulted in over a dozen of their men dying. Looking into the matter reveals that the Commandant Lingolf was the one who was leaking the info. As soon as Scar returns with the news, he overhears that the Commandant has fled the base. Scar then meets with the leader of Freedom, Chekhov, who tells him that he and the Commandant were actually the ones who founded Freedom, so this betrayal cuts deep. Thankfully, all the exits out of the Dark Valley are sealed, so he's somewhere nearby. Dealing with the Commandant and taking his PDA back to Chekhov will curry favor with Freedom, and in turn let Chekhov spill the location of Fang, which is, of course, back at Garbage. Heading to the coordinates given by Chekhov, Scar finds Fang's PDA. Reading his PDA, Scar learns that Fang did indeed make it to the center of the zone, and that someone knows that they did, and that they're looking for him. This confirms Lebedev's suspicions, that the zone really is taking preventative measures to stop them from getting too close. He suggests following the coordinates in Fang's PDA to his stash, as their plans are said to be there. Following the coordinates will lead Scar to the Agroprom Institute. The issue is that the coordinates lead underground, but not only is this Duty territory, but the underground isn't even under Duty's command. Like with Freedom, Scar will have to do a favor for a favor. He helps them by flooding the caves of the mutants using the underground pump station, which will also give Scar unfettered access to the stash. After helping Duty, Scar finds the stash and discovers that Fang was in talk with two other Stalkers, Strelok and Ghost. They plan on going underneath the Brain Scorcher, but they weren't able to. However, they managed to procure some equipment that would let them go through it. Fang left the equipment near Dr. Sakharov's place in Yantar. Lebedev then tells Scar to find Strelok, as he and the rest of the faction will handle Ghost and Fang. Talking with the professor reveals that he and Strelok had struck a deal. He would help test a new experimental C emission blocker, and Strelok would get the final version in return. He went into the facility here in Yantar to test its effects, but never came back. Getting into the factory is likely to melt Scar's brain and turn him into one of the zombies around here. So Sakharov suggests he find some documents nearby that a group of stalkers left behind, which had details on what was inside the factory. Approaching its location, we see a group of zombified stalkers, likely our aforementioned group. They unfortunately succumbed to the C emissions and became zombies. But with the info in hand, Sakharov realizes that the device in the factory is man-made. The pulses of the C energy are a result of a failure from the device's cooling system. If Scar can repair it, then things should go back to normal. Scar then works with a group of stalkers employed by the professor to help assist him in repairing the device. The group then invades the factory, takes down all the zombies they come across, and then takes up defensive positions so they can get the repairs done. With everything repaired, the factory no longer produces harmful C emissions, meaning any new stalkers who come into the vicinity will no longer be added to the horde. This also gives Scar a way past the facility and into the Red Forest where Strelok is located. Entering, he is immediately ambushed by Strelok and some men who are allied with him. Strelok manages to evade Scar long enough to enter through the Brain Scorcher. Going through there would be suicide without the proper equipment, and since we don't have any, Scar's only option is to go through Limansk. Lebedev suggests finding Forrester here in the Red Forest, as he's the only one who would know how to get inside. Forrester explains that Limansk is a very secretive place. It used to be a place for scientists and their servants. They were studying something called a radio wave, which included installing a 5-story tall antenna within the town. The scientists working here were also bothered by outsiders, and many of the same outsiders reported headaches when they approached the town. He then points Scar to a location not far from here. Forrester's been picking up radio frequencies near Limansk, but the signals are weak, and the stalkers themselves seem to be caught in some loop space, meaning they always seem to loop back to where they were just by heading in different directions. The group of stalkers manage to get themselves caught in a spatial anomaly, so Scar uses a transmitter to help them escape. The problem is that the transmitter is in military territory, and these mercs can't be seen getting into fights with the military. So their leader Hog calls in a favor with a friend of his from Freedom, who helps Scar attack the base. This will give Scar time to transmit the codes and allow these guys to escape the anomaly. These mercs, thanks to Scar's help, had actually managed to pop out on the other side of the bridge they needed to cross. So they'll lower the bridge while Clear Sky defends them. Once that's done, Clear Sky is a straight shot to Limansk. Inside the town are a few bandits and mercs, along with a ton of monolith soldiers. As they are a faction whose whole purpose is to defend the zone, it only makes sense that they defend one of the ways inside. After a long and strenuous firefight, it's up to Scar to find Strelok and use a new electromagnetic prototype that Lebedev had made. This weapon should remove his C protection, leaving him vulnerable to the Brain Scorcher's effects. Recalling our past conversation, Lab X8, the one Lebedev was a part of, was also where the Gauss rifle was produced, which would explain how he managed to procure such a unique weapon for Scar. Scar will then stop Strelok and save the zone, but the zone seems to have responded with another emission before the game cuts to black. Clear Sky leaves the fate of the faction ambiguous, but future titles will tell us that just about every one of them died except Scar and a couple of others thanks to the emission, leaving Clear Sky to be one of the many forgotten factions that perish within the zone. The last scene then shows Scar and Strelok hooked up to various TVs, projecting all kinds of images into their heads, before it glances to a stalker tattoo on Strelok's arm, bringing an end to Clear Sky. Shadow of Chernobyl picks up sometime after this in 2012. It first begins with a scene showing a death truck driving through the zone. In the back of the truck is our new protagonist. Despite the death truck being electrocuted, he manages to survive the explosion and is taken to the cordon to be looked at by Sidorovich. The man has a marking on his arm, something Sidorovich has seen before, but none of the men he's seen it on have survived, except this one. For this, he gets the nickname the Mark I. Along with his belongings was a PDA detailing his mission, which was to kill Strelok. Having suffered from amnesia, the Mark I isn't sure why he was supposed to kill Strelok or who gave him the job in the first place. Given it's the only part of his past he has to cling to, he decides to learn more about this mission of his by chasing down Strelok. Like before though, I'd like to revisit the zone. It's been a whole year since Clear Sky, and the faction war has surely affected the zone. Shadow of Chernobyl shares the same map as Clear Sky, so we can see how these older locations have evolved since we last stepped foot here. Starting with the easy ones, the Cordon and Yentar have largely remained the same since Clear Sky. The Cordon is still a place for newer stalkers, and the trader of the region is still Sidorovich. The military have set up a checkpoint in between the Cordon to stop stalkers from getting through, however. But their security is quite flimsy, as a few rubles could change their mind. While Yentar is still being run by Dr. Sakharov, who is still carrying out research in the zone in the nearby factory. Although thanks to these sea emissions disappearing, the place was preyed upon immediately, resulting in a bloodbath between the stalkers, military, and Monolith. Some snorks seem to have escaped the underground as a result, and someone turned the sea emissions back on. Garbage, on the other hand, has changed significantly. Bandit presence still remains, but it's nowhere near as populated as it was in Clear Sky. Now the region is inhabited by mostly free stalkers, returning the place to a neutral area. Some small bandit groups do try to fight for territory, but they aren't nearly as fierce as they used to be, at least in Garbage anyway, as the headquarters for the bandits has moved to the Dark Valley, with it now being run by Borov. He used to be the bandits' barman, and dialogue from him suggests that he was very critical of Yoga's rule, so it's no wonder he's running the show now. As for Agroprom, the Stalker facility is still owned by Stalkers, but is being fought over by them in the military when we arrive. And Duty's old base is now another base for the military. Another location that's seen some new management are the army warehouses. Previously a lawless unclaimed land, the military has all but been driven out of the base and is now under freedom jurisdiction. Just outside the walls, a small group of Duty soldiers who ask for assistance in taking down the base. You can choose to accept this mission, or alternatively let Freedom's leader Lukash know about their whereabouts and join a team of his who will hunt them down. Besides that, the nearby village that used to be a small resting place for stalkers is now overrun by bloodsuckers. And the barrier has been rebuilt, guarded by members of Freedom. The Red Forest also makes a return, but the player goes through a different part of the Red Forest this time, one that is guarded by Monolith all the way to the Brain Scourger. Besides the old location, Shadow of Chernobyl also introduces a new location, Rostock. Originally its entrance was blocked off and guarded by bandits, but now that they've been run out of garbage for the most part, the checkpoint is now owned by Duty, as the bar serves the Duty's new headquarters. The bar is a cozy looking place where stalkers of all kind, minus Freedom, can come and relax. The bar 100 Reds is a great place to meet other stalkers and take jobs. There is an arena where stalkers can battle against mutants and other stalkers for fame and glory, while visitors can bet on the winners, and the place is entirely devoid of anomalies and mutants. Just outside the bar is a place known as Wild Territory. As the name suggests, it's quite a lawless wildland filled with mutants, anomalies, and bandits. With all that laid out though, it's worth asking what the result of the faction war was. And for that, I don't have an answer, because as you can see, it's all over the place. The change likely has to do with the games themselves. Clear Sky, despite ranking first in story order, is actually the second game in release order. So all this stuff about the faction war and Clear Sky was retroactively added into the game. This causes a bit of a complication, as there isn't a clear indication that any single faction won their respective war, or if they even participated in one at all. Regardless, this is where our beloved zone stands for now. New locations, old renovations, and just as many deadly mutants and anomalies. Let's hope Strelok survived, or else this mission of ours is going to get a lot harder. Returning to the task at hand, the Mark I attempts to get their bearings by working for Sidorovich. After a few routine jobs, Sidorovich lets him in on who this Strelok guy really is. Like before, he's one of the few who made it to the center of the zone, so he's not to be messed with, which makes the Mark I's mission all the more concerning. Sidorovich goes on to say that both he and the Mark I can work together. Strelok has explored the northern parts of the zone, locations untapped by stalkers, meaning there are artifacts aplenty. So the Mark I is going to waste Strelok when he sees him, and Sidorovich will get some share of the profit. To start, he instructs the Mark I to go to the Agroprom Institute. There are documents that mention the Brain Scorcher, the device that continues to restrict access to the center of the zone. Along the way, the Mark I runs into a few other stalkers, who are known to have run into Strelok in some fashion. He'll then follow this trail to Agroprom. Upon arriving at the factory, the military has already taken the fight to a band of stalkers. Helping them allows one of their men, Mole, to guide the Marked One to the secret hideout of Strelok. Not too far from the factory is a small sewer. Following the path, the Marked One comes across Strelok's hideout. Inside is a flash drive showing a conversation between Ghost and Strelok. According to the text, Fang is dead. We know from Clear Sky that the faction was hunting his trio, but according to Pripyat, it was not Clear Sky who took him out. Fang's death is at the hand of a few mercenaries, not anyone notable. The rest of the conversation tells us that Strelok and Ghost are meant to meet up somewhere, but Strelok went ahead and took off towards the center of the zone. Likely around the same time Scar and Clear Sky were hunting the group. The Marked One then goes to the Agroprom Institute and finds the documents Sidorovich mentioned. He'll then take these to the barkeep over at the bar. Barkeep says though that the info is incomplete, and that the rest is likely found at the X-18 lab in Dark Valley. It requires 2 specific keys to enter. The barkeep has one, and the other is owned by Borov. Once he has both keys, the Mark 1 can get into X-18. Making it inside the lab, the Mark 1 will then run into some mutants and anomalies like a poltergeist. After killing a pyrogeist and finding some documents, the Mark 1 collapses, and a cutscene plays, showing Strelok near the center of the zone. Coming to, the Mark 1 senses the military, as they seem to have caught wind of the break-in, so he'll have to fight his way out. Returning to the barkeep, the Mark 1 discovers that the Brain Scorcher is man-made. It was made using a Kaimonov experimental emitter, whose components came from X-16. So another lab, another set of documents. To get there, he'll have to work with Professor Sakharov. He's still studying the C emissions, and even managed to find that prototype that he had Strelok test, which we can use to help block out some of the C energy underneath the factory. The base is also still surrounded by zombies and Snorks, but after fighting back the hordes, they're able to get inside the factory. After turning off the C emission, the Mark 1 will then run into a controller along with the body of Ghost. Both Ghost and Vasily, a scientist working for Sakharov, were attempting to shut down the lab, but they failed. Vasily died outside near the bunker surrounded by zombies, and Ghost was likely taken by this controller. Deactivating the C emissions also plays a cutscene of someone known as the Doctor talking with Strelok, before he shows the Doctor the Heart of Chernobyl, something that will come into play in a future sequel. It then ends with Strelok talking about venturing to the north, towards the center of the zone. With everything all set to go, the Marked One is told by the barkeep how to get to the Brain Scorcher. Before you do that, however, there is a quick string of missions you can do first, which first begins with the Marked One meeting with Guide. Guide can supposedly go anywhere you want. He's been to every part of the zone and has helped Strelok and his crew numerous times. He tells us of the Doctor's location, which is back at Strelok's hideout near the Agroprom factory. Traveling back sees the Mark 1 knocked out from a trap. The Doctor, over his body, talks to him, calling him Strelok, confused as to how he got caught in the trap when he was the one who suggested they booby-trap it in the first place. This confirms that the Marked One has actually been Strelok the whole time, and that he's been tasked with killing himself. This clears up the marking on his arm which we saw at the end of Clear Sky. Strelok had managed to escape the facility back in Clear Sky only to lose his memories and attempt to kill himself. Once Strelok finds his bearings, he'll then continue with the mission and head to the center of the zone. He'll have to cross the barrier and enter Monolith territory if he is to shut down the Brain Scorcher. Strelok will then make it underground and destroy the Brain Scorcher. With this device being the sole reason no one's made it to the center of the zone, everyone has mobilized on the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, or CMPP. Duty, Freedom, the military, even regular stalkers are here, all looking to grab a piece of the pie. All Strelok needs to do is get through all that unscathed and make his way to the center of the zone. Monolith isn't just going to let anyone inside though, at least not without a fight, so they'll be the main fighting force going forward. Pripyat, like in real life, served as a living quarters for those who worked at the Chernobyl power plants, although it seems to have been expanded into a proper city as places of entertainment and education were built within the city as well. There was a large stadium in the northern part of the city, a large Ferris wheel, which some of you might remember from COD 4, and a Palace of Culture, buildings that housed all kinds of recreational activities during the Soviet Union. Interestingly, within the Palace of Culture is a uniquely named monolith soldier named Charon. Stalker notably uses randomly generated names for its characters, except unique ones like Sidorovich or Fang. Charon is interesting because he's also unique but never gets mentioned outside of his placement in the basement. According to the wiki, the in-game code lists him as the leader of Monolith. He doesn't say anything, but I thought this was interesting nonetheless. But just because he's the leader doesn't mean he is the founder, as the real founders are about to be revealed. As once Strelok makes it inside the reactor, he starts hearing the voice of the Wish Granter. As the legend goes, there exists an ancient object known as the Wish Granter, which is said to grant any wish that you desire as long as you make it to the center. However, the Wish Granter is a lie. All it exists to do is brainwash people into joining Monolith. Depending on a variety of factors, you can get one of 5 endings. All of them are lies. None of these wishes will come true, as the real endings will show. Taking a different path when inside the reactor, we'll see Strelok meeting with C Consciousness. C Consciousness is a group of 7 scientists who link their brains together to create a common consciousness. They explain that they first studied the zone back in 1989 after the first explosion. These experiments consisted of all kinds of tests. Scattered throughout the zone are various locations called X-Labs. These are run by the scientists back in the day, with just about each one placing a specific importance on one kind of test. X3 had some TVs near the control room and a visiograph which created the illusion of a lush field of flowers, so brainwashing and illusion experimentation was conducted here. X5 ran experiments on leashes and controller abilities to see if they could control the mutants, and also be able to implant these abilities into a person. X7 is underneath the large structure known as the generators and are where the pods of C Consciousness lie. X8 seems to be just a basic research lab, but it not only contains documents about the other labs, but it also has a few notes about Project 62, which was the project that would lead to the creation of the Gauss rifle. X16 is the facility under Yantar. Documents claim that one of the lab's main discoveries was that living creatures could generate directed C emissions. As such, they created a large biological field emitter which looked a lot like a brain to run some tests on. X18 was also about C-related emissions, except it seems as though some of the test subjects they were working on had broken out of containment. And X19 is underneath the brain scorcher, and is where Strelok would need to go to turn it off. All of these experiments, while different in design and scope, had one connective thread, and that's the noosphere. In real life, the noosphere is a philosophical concept, popularized by biogeochemist Vladimir Vernadsky and Jesuit priest Pierre Chardin. Due to the nature of their professions, each one developed a different explanation for its existence. Vladimir took a scientific approach, claiming that the noosphere is the third sphere that surrounds the Earth, along with the geo and biosphere. The biosphere refers to all biological life, while the geosphere is the rest, things like rocks, minerals, etc. The noosphere, then, is the collective sphere of human thought and rationale. Vladimir believed each of these 3 spheres built off each other for growth, while Chardin's approach claimed that the noosphere rose from humanity's growth, further saying that as humans grow in population size, intellect, and complexity, the noosphere will grow along with them. As mentioned in a previous video though, the noosphere, at least in real life, isn't real. There is no way of knowing as of now if it exists or not. Unlike the ozone layer, something invisible to the naked eye but can still be measured and tracked. Stalker makes this a reality. C Consciousness had discovered it not too long after settling in the zone and worked tirelessly to connect to it. That's why they merged their minds, as connecting to it required all their collective effort. Their main goal was to make small adjustments to the noosphere and remove the negative feelings within humans, such as anger, greed, and cruelty, assuming it would evolve humanity in some way. But they failed. They overstepped and one of their experiments failed, which caused a massive explosion, the explosion of 2006, meaning they created the zone. Ever since then, they've been hard at work continuing to run the experiments, but numerous problems arose. Firstly, the energy that was being produced in their experiments was so much that they needed to off-gas it into the atmosphere, meaning they're also the creators of the emissions. So Lebedev wasn't that far off in assuming that the emissions were an immune response from the zone, as C Consciousness was using it to stop people from getting too close, but where he faltered was assuming that the zone was sentient or had a mind of its own, not knowing that the real controllers were inside the sender the whole time. The other was the presence of mutants and stalkers now that the zone had been formed, on top of the fact that the zone was trying to outgrow its confines, something C Consciousness was trying to stop. To help prevent the halting of their research, they created numerous lines of defense to stop the people from getting too close. This included the Brain Scorcher, the Agents, the Wish Granter, and Monolith. The Brain Scorcher would fry a person's brain, turning them into mindless zombies. They would then join Monolith and fight to defend C Consciousness against their will. The Wish Granter was just another tool of deception, as while it may seem like your wish was granted, you would actually be brainwashed into fighting for C Consciousness. The Agents, however, were a little bit different. They would act as, well, agents who would do their bidding in secret, and Strelok was one of them. Those who were hooked up to the TVs were meant to be agents of C Consciousness, and the tattoo on their body was to signify that they were agents. C Consciousness would then use the death trucks as a way to smuggle their agents into the zone, even though most of them would die in transit. This would explain why Strelok and his crew were being hunted. It's possible that they were being attacked by agents of C Consciousness who wanted them silenced. But they failed when an error occurred and Strelok was brainwashed into killing himself. Strelok, though, now has a choice between joining them and becoming the 8th mind of C Consciousness, or destroying them. Canonically, he destroys the scientists, which requires him to travel through various portals across the CMPP to get to where they are. Strelok will then shoot rounds into their tanks, preventing them from ever using people again. As the game ends, Strelok finds himself in a lush scenery of flora, while he questions whether he made the right decision. He's not sure if he did, but what he does know is that he's happy to just be alive. Call of Pripyat begins a few months after Shadow of Chernobyl. It stars Major Degtyaryv of the Ukrainian Secret Service. During the attack on the CMPP, the military conducted an operation known as Operation Fairway. Dozens of military helicopters carrying troops are headed to the CMPP, but none had survived. The crews and the helicopters were lost, dealing a massive blow to the military. Major Degtyaryv, USS Special Agent and former Stalker, is being sent into the zone to learn what happened. Once again though, let's talk about the zone. Unlike previous titles, Call of Pripyat doesn't take place in these same locations. Call of Pripyat only has 3 locations: Zaton, Jupiter, and Pripyat. Zaton is the starting area. The main resting place is the Skadovsk, an abandoned ship now serving as the central hub for any stalkers in the area. The founder of this little place is Beard, who along with Groose serves as bartender and sheriff respectively. After Sherlock destroyed the Brain Scorcher, Beard arrived in Zaton to explore the previously unknown area. Beard, like other barmen, has lots of connections, and he runs a pretty legitimate artifact business, trading them amongst other stalkers and even those outside the zone. Beard can eventually get himself in a minor conflict with Sultan, the leader of the bandits here in Zaton. Compared to the previous leaders, Sultan seems a bit more amicable, as he offers up the idea of taxing people for their services. He came here to the zone because the outside world wasn't for him. One of his buddies, Tolyan, died due to some bad drugs, so Sultan killed his friend's dealer. After going to jail and serving time, he got busted again and realized that this normal life wasn't for him. So he left it all behind to chase the zone. Both these men are involved in a mission called the Hit. Sultan wants to take over the Skadovsk, but doing that's going to be easier said than done. Firstly, he wants us to help him take out some lonely stalkers on another abandoned ship called the Shevchenko. Their leader Spartacus is a part of Beard's crew. If you help the bandits, then the crew will be no more. Sultan will then ask you to be a hired gun for a transaction, as a corrupt duty officer named Morgan is selling them weapons, and he wants to make sure things go smoothly. The meeting is ambushed by some stalkers, forcing you to take out both the stalkers and Morgan to complete the quest. Alternatively, you could tell Beard about the attack on his men beforehand, allowing him to hire a few extra stalkers to catch the bandits off guard. Afterwards, you'll then be tasked with taking out that duty officer Morgan before he sells the guns to the bandits. Either leader ends up running the Skadovsk by the end. Beard's rule continues as normal, as his artifact business continues to boom, while Sultan's rule issues in a time of relative peace, as anyone who steps out of line is made an example of. The only other place of note in Zaton is the Old Barge, which houses a man named Noah. Owing to his name, Noah believes that a large wave will come to the zone in the form of an emission, followed by a horde of mutants who will kill everyone. He claims that his ark is the safest place in the zone, and is the only place that can protect the people from the coming wave. Hilariously, if Noah survives to the end of the game, the end slide will show us that a group of stalkers sought refuge in his ark to hide from an emission. The barge was also attacked by Snorks, but the barge's defenses and Noah's army of pseudo-dogs had run them out. So, maybe there is some truth to his words. To the south of Zaton is Jupiter, a place filled with all kinds of factions, anomalies, and mutants. The main hub is Yanov Station. It's inhabited by both Freedom and Duty, as both groups agreed to call the place neutral ground. The most important area in Jupiter is the mobile lab. Like previous labs, this is run by a couple of scientists, namely Dr. Herman and Dr. Ozerski. They're guarded by mercenaries led by Black and his crew, while also hiring stalkers Topol, Mace, Spirit, and Snake as their helpers for their ecological research. You're free to assist both of them in their scientific endeavors should you choose to. Dr. Herman follows more research-related things, such as planting scanners and defending Topol and his crew from mutants while they scan for anomalies. Herman's questline ends with you finding documents on the Jupiter factory, the place this location is named after. After you find the documents though, you're ambushed by Black and his crew. Looking over his PDA, you learn that they were told by a guy named Jackal to guard the doctor's bunkers. They were told to make sure no X-Lab research reaches the scientists, and if it does, they won't be able to leave the zone. With them dead, however, this means that no one is left to guard the bunker, which allows you to choose between a variety of different groups or factions depending on your preference. Dr. Ozerski, on the other hand, is more interested in the unknowns. He's been recently obsessed with finding this place called the Oasis, and he wants you to help him find it. It's located south of the bunker in the ventilation complex. You'll happen upon a looping room of sorts and you'll need to find a way out. You need to walk through the columns until a starry effect appears between them, then walk through only those starried pillars, and from there, the Oasis is yours. You can then take the Heart of Oasis artifact to Ozerski and get paid for your reward. It's also worth noting here that Novico, the technician of Clear Sky, is stationed here now, continuing his duties as technician but now under the doctors, implying that he either didn't join the assault on the CMPP or somehow survived. Throughout both maps are also a handful of new anomalies. They don't function too differently from the other anomalies we've seen before, but it's showing that anomalies are not always small or contained. As their name suggests, their nature is anomalous, so their size, purpose, and danger are all different. Interestingly, there is also a downed UAV tucked away in the northwest corner of the map. It doesn't contribute to anything within the game, but it was likely used by the military to keep an eye on things. How it was struck down though is unclear. It could have been an anomaly, or better yet, it might have been an emission. As while walking around Call of Pripyat, you're likely to stumble upon a few emissions. As we talked about earlier, the emissions were controlled by sea consciousness, as they were the ones releasing the energy of the noosphere into the atmosphere. Well, with sea consciousness gone, it should mean that the emissions are gone too, right? Not quite. See, as the scientists said themselves, they've been holding the zone back from expanding. Without their input, the zone would have grown in size and veracity. At the time, they were able to control it. Now that they are out of the picture, that would explain why the emissions are more numerous than before. The zone was always going to be able to conjure up emissions. Sea consciousness was just able to control it back then. The helicopters that the Major is meant to find are also in these locations as well. Investigating them reveals each aircraft was destroyed in different ways. Some of the crew died immediately when in the air, others managed to survive the ensuing crash. One of the helicopter's black boxes was unharmed, others not. The Major does manage to find some locations on a map that are said to be evacuation points, should the crew need an airlift out of the zone. Asking a local technician for assistance, the Major learns that evacuation point B28 is where the rest of the survivors are held up. That puts them squarely in the middle of Pripyat, which is currently inaccessible as of right now. A lookout for duty named Zulu is willing to get the Major to Pripyat through an underground passage. But not only is it filled with radiation, so a sevasuit of some kind will be necessary, but mutants populate the underground, so they'll need some backup. There are 3 available companions for this mission: Sokolov, Vano, and Strider. Only one is necessary to begin, but you're free to take everyone with you to make things easier. They are all fairly easy to recruit. Vano is found at Yanov Station. He owes some money to some bandits but can't pay off the debt as they keep adding interest to his payment. You can either kill them or pay off his debt. Either option makes him recruitable. Sokolov is a military soldier who was a part of the Stingray helicopters that the Major was sent to investigate. He's now working for the doctors in the mobile lab, trying to figure out a way to get to his comrades. Our reasons for going to Pripyat are the same as his, so he's willing to join. But you'll need to talk to Ozerski first as he needs a sevasuit to enter. Strider is the most interesting member of the group by far. While patrolling Jupiter, you'll come across a small band of friendly monolith soldiers led by Strider. He explains that they are not hostile and don't want any trouble. Strider says that all he remembers was the bright shining light of the Wish Granter. Everything else about his past was gone. Strider in Heart of Chernobyl will also corroborate this, further saying that everyone lost decades worth of their life. It's as if their lives first started when they became Monolith. The Major can ask him to join their expedition, but he'll only do so once his men are safe. This means you'll have to either recruit them to duty or freedom. But the leaders aren't willing to take them in just like that. They are Monolith after all, and everyone has a history with them. So you'll need to curry favor with the leader of whatever group you choose before they can join. Once a part of the faction, Strider's able to be recruited. Once you've gathered all the companions you want, it's time to head to Pripyat. As expected, there are lots of anomalies and snorks waiting and hiding. After escaping, the Major meets with Colonel Kowalski. He too has been looking into why the operation failed so swiftly. He believes it to be the work of an experimental weapon that Monolith had created. A squad not far from the military hideout in Pripyat was spotted using one, so the Colonel wants Degtyarev to grab this weapon and bring it back here for analysis. We learn that the experimental weapon is a Gauss rifle called Project 62, a weapon we've seen in previous Stalker games before. Before we can even get a chance to analyze the weapon, a recon team is attacked, so the Major is sent in again to assess the situation. The recon team is dead by the time the Major arrives, but some coordinates on their bodies take it to a base surrounded by Monolith soldiers. Despite the fact that the Wish Granter has lost most of its power, some still worship its divinity, which is why Monolith still exists. This ends this thread of the main quest for now, as we're also asked to look into the Gauss rifle we picked up. The Major finds some documents related to the weapon, which not only help him repair it, but also point to his next location, Lab X8. Down here is a host of different documents all about the X-Labs and their research, things we discussed earlier in the video, and things the military would definitely like to know. After bringing the info back to the Colonel, he'll ask to speak to the Major privately. Simply put, they're in a bit of a bind. No evacuation choppers have been spotted, they can't communicate with HQ, their men are dropping like flies, and Monolith has continued to put on the pressure. They need to re-establish communication with headquarters immediately. They discovered that something might be jamming their signals to HQ, so the Major is tasked with finding and destroying this jammer. This jammer is a large antenna with some sea emissions flowing out of it. Once destroyed, communication has been restored. The Major then tells the Colonel of the good news. Amidst their conversation, one of the techs spots a radio signal not far from them. It's heading towards the base, and the Colonel assumes it's a monolith. Following the signal, the Major discovers that it's not Monolith, but Strelok. He's here because he has information that could lead to the removal of the zone. He also explains that the reason their Stingray helicopters were destroyed was because their anomaly maps are outdated. Anomalies aren't stationary, they move when an emission occurs, so the military was operating off old information, which is how they were destroyed. They crossed over an anomaly in an area they previously thought was safe. With communication restored, the Major's objective was complete, so all that was left was to evacuate. Surrounding them is dozens of zombies, so the military will have to fight their way out of here. After a long firefight, the helicopter will arrive and evacuate the survivors. From here, various end sides will play depending on the completion or lack thereof of certain quests, as well as the status of certain individuals you met along the way. Following the events of the game, Major Degtyarev would hand over the info he found at the X-Labs to the USS. All the info was then filed under top secret, and the personnel within the zone were ordered to never let its secrets be unearthed ever. Project 62, the project that led to the creation of the Gauss rifle, was considered by the military. But due to high budget costs, it was decided that mass production was impossible. But manufacturing of the weapon as a whole was still on the table. Major Degtyarev was promoted to colonel for his efforts in the zone and was recommended to serve as a mission coordinator for the USS, but declined, wishing to be sent back into the zone as a permanent observer. Strelok had passed on his findings in the CNPP to the USS commanders. This then led to the creation of a government facility called Circa, with Strelok being hired as a chief scientist consultant. As for stuff outside the main quest, both the Anov station and the Skadovs had the potential to be overrun with mutants should certain hunt quests not be completed. If they are completed, then the places remain afloat. Siding with Duty or Freedom more during specific side quests that involve the factions will either reside in Duty or Freedom beating the opposing faction. If you didn't gain the trust of either faction, then things remain neutral, and the soldiers of each side have started leaving the factions and becoming free stalkers instead. And finally for the companions, Zulu, Vano, Strider, and Sokolov all have the potential to die during the expedition. Assuming they don't, Zulu becomes the leader of a small squad of duty members at the General's request. Vano travels to the army warehouses still owned by Freedom and earned a reputation as a cheerful, optimistic guy. He also leads a band of researchers who investigate anomalies. Strider left whatever faction he was a part of and started a new group. Rumors say that all their members are ex-Monolith fighters. And Sokolov will continue to do flying missions over the zone, only to be shot down again near the cordon. He was rescued again and from there decided to leave the Air Force and join a civil airline instead. Thus concluding, call it Pripyat. Heart of Chernobyl begins at least 9 years later in 2021. It starts with our protagonist Skiff waking up to an anomaly in his home, which explodes and destroys the little he had. Homeless, he turns to the origin of the artifact that was left behind after the explosion and sets out to the zone. He's driven to the perimeter by Dr. Herman, who thanks to the Major's efforts was able to facilitate the development of groundbreaking medicine and technology. The Ministry of Education will then allocate more funds towards research in the zone, which allowed him and Ozerski to remain within its borders. Skiff then hands Herman the artifact and puts it into his scanner, likely an evolution of his previous scanner work from Call of Pripyat. Skiff is then told to use the scanner on specific anomalies to charge the artifact, but after 2 attempts, nothing happens. He tries a 3rd time but is interrupted by some members of a new faction called the Ward. They almost catch Skiff before a sniper from a watchtower shoots them, giving him a chance to run away. As he runs, Herman says that their contact Solder sold them out, before Skiff is attacked by a group of stalkers. One of them takes the scanner and leaves him for dead. As he wakes the following morning, he's found by a man named Richter who helps him out of the anomaly field. Skiff's main goal is to then find out what happened and get his scanner back, and to do that he'll need to talk to his previous contact, Solder. Richter recommends checking Zalicia, a nearby haven for stalkers. But before we go there, once again, let's talk about the zone for the final time. Heart of Chernobyl not only takes place a decade or so later, but it's the largest map in the series thus far, encompassing every location in the previous 3 games and then some, so we have a lot to cover. Firstly though, we need to talk about the map. Stalker 2's map is a little confusing. Previous games never gave off the indication that the areas were connected, as you did have to go through a loading screen, but lots of locations have been moved or changed around. The swamps and clear sky was southwest of the cordon, but now it's to the far east of it. The Brain Scorcher was said to be within the Red Forest and was directly next to Pripyat, and here it's not even close. So just keep in mind some of the locations are a bit different than how you might remember them. In terms of the old locations, all of them have returned but have seen some changes over the past decade. The cordon continues to remain the same, except the military presence has been swapped with the IPSF. The International Perimeter Security Force is, as the name implies, a security force who patrols the perimeters of the zone. This used to be the role of the Ukrainian military, but due to the size and infamy of the zone, it's possible that the UN or some kind of international organization decided to create a dedicated faction that would watch over the zone. Garbage, though, has seen some changes. The Dark Valley is now merged with Garbage on the map. The old base that used to belong to Freedom and Clear Sky, that was taken over by Borov and his crew in Shadow of Chernobyl, now belongs to Varan, a man who was gunning for the title of Kingpin within Garbage. There's also a new safe haven called Slag Keep, which is surrounded by lots of garbage. It's currently owned by Free Stalkers, but after a few main missions it'll be overrun by the Ward. Agroprom has been merged with the chemical plant on the map. The chemical plant, the place it's named after, is now a base for the Ward, while the Agroprom Institute and factory are completely abandoned. They used to be owned by the military, but given they no longer operate within the zone, it makes sense why they moved out. The chemical plant also contains the army warehouses. Yeah, like I said, this map is a little confusing. But the previously Freedom-owned base has also been deserted, the bloodsucker-filled village still exists, and if I'm being honest, I could not find the barrier. I don't believe it exists in this entry, although I could be wrong. It is not marked on the map explicitly, but it is possible that it went through some renovations and goes under a different name. Rostock largely remains the same in terms of design, but Duty was kicked out and replaced with Freedom. Prior to the start of the game, a new faction known as the Ward entered the zone. They are the military force of Circa, which we briefly mentioned in Call of Pripyat. The Ward issued a peace treaty called the D4 Pact, which Freedom, Duty, Noontide, and the Ward all signed. Within this treaty was also terms that involve what land they were told to give up and what new places they could claim. Part of Duty's honoring of that deal meant leaving the Rostock to Freedom, who now runs the whole location. Nyantar has changed slightly as the scientist bunker that used to house Professor Sakharov has been abandoned. And the Red Forest also remains the same outside of more expansion, although Duty and Monolith are non-existent. So outside of the occasional free Stalker, it's just filled with nothing but mutants and anomalies. Clear Sky's swampy base is now on the bottom right of the map, and as alluded to earlier, has been completely abandoned. All of Clear Sky, save for a couple people, were killed. Clear Sky as a faction is no more, so it makes sense that the base also ceases to exist. As for the Call of Pripyat locations, Zaton is right above the swamps. The Ward has managed to establish a base in the region called Camp Icarus, and the Skadovs and Shevchenko return but under new management. The Skadovs is now run by Sultan, who now creatively calls it the Sultansk, while Beard runs the Shevchenko. Dialogue from both men seem to suggest that the bandit side of the conflict is canon. Beard states that Sultan ran him out of the Skadovs 7 years ago, thanks to their men getting a heavy supply of weapons, likely the same weapons given to them by Morgan. Beard then tried to find Major Degtyarev in Pripyat but didn't get what he wanted out of him. He then returned to Zaton a year ago to commandeer the Shevchenko. They are once again involved in another conflict with one another. Sultan took some of Beard's men, and Beard sends some of his other men to take a shipment of Sultan's. It's learned, though, that their conflict was carefully engineered by the ship's bartender, Sonia, in the hope that they would kill each other so that she could run the ship. She has her own allies and motivations, but you could choose to either help her, resulting in both Beard and Sultan's death, or betray her, which results in Beard and Sultan finally making amends and vowing to work together. Yanov Station and Jupiter have now been moved to the northwest right next to Pripyat. The base that used to belong to Herman and Ozersky is abandoned. Herman obviously moved on to other projects, but Ozersky moved to STC Malachite, another research base here in the zone. Yanov Station is now also heavily guarded by the military, and that has to do with Pripyat. Major, now Colonel Degtyarev, stayed behind as alluded to in Call of Pripyat, and has continued to square off against Monolith since. He has blocked off all access to Pripyat, only allowing one entrance through Yanov Station, which requires special permission. This allows him to know who gets in or out of Pripyat, so as to make sure Monolith doesn't leave. As for the new locations, the first one you'll visit is the Lesser Zone. Similar to the Cordon, it acts as a first step for many new stalkers who make their way past the perimeter, with Zalicia serving as one of its main hubs. It also contains the Sphere, which is a base run by the IPSF. To the west is the Burned Forest. Not much to tell that the name already doesn't explain itself. The place is almost entirely scorched with very little signs of civilization left, and anything living in this area is more than likely a mutant. Next to that is Duga, named after the Duga radar array. To the north of that is Malachite. This location houses lots of programs and experimental labs. The VPC Mirror Facility, the Tropospheric Comm Station, Prominent CTD Factory, STC Malachite, and even the Brain Scorcher. All these places serve or used to serve as traditional factories or research labs. And, for the sake of posterity, the Brain Scorcher has also been abandoned, save for a squad of mercs who can show up during an unrelated side quest. Towards the east is Wild Island, now the home base of a new faction called Noontide. Noontide is run by Strider, and is the former Monolith faction that Call of Pripyat alluded to. The ranks are filled with former Monolith members whose brainwashing has faded thanks to Strelok. The island, while only separated by a small amount of water, has been carefully guarded by Noontide to prevent an attack from either side of the base, making the center of the island the safest place to be for the former Monolith soldiers. North of Wild Island are the cement factory and the cooling towers. Not much to say about these locations specifically, as the names are based off those specific structures, but it is worth mentioning that right at the checkpoint between the locations are the new headquarters of Duty. General Voronin from Shadow of Chernobyl is still running the show, and is doing his best to continue to uphold Duty's goals. The treaty was a major setback for the faction, but he's happy with their new location. And the final area is Circa's headquarters, which can be accessed through Zaton. It's just as lavish as you would expect and houses hundreds of people from ward soldiers to researchers, all working towards Circa's end goal of prosperity for humanity. Besides the new locations, Heart of Chernobyl takes a page out of Call of Pripyat, and litters the land with all kinds of unique anomalies. From menacing-looking orbs that just float in the water, to fire tornadoes, to a field of poppies that cause you to hallucinate. I should also state for the record that this is a gross oversimplification of the areas present in Heart of Chernobyl. Because of its size, there are dozens of locations in each area, but most of them are abandoned, so I felt that it wasn't necessary to mention every location in the game. Doing so could easily add another 20 minutes to this video. And finally, something interesting is the change in currency. Previous games used Russian rubles, but now it's been changed to coupons. Not discount coupons, mind you. It's likely referring to the Ukrainian currency Karbonovants. Ukraine notably uses hryvnia as its currency, but the country used to call it Karbovadants, which is often called coupons. According to Sonia, a guy from Freedom in Rostock started the idea, and apparently everyone just went along with it. Given they used the name of a now defunct currency instead of an actual one, this suggests that the zone really is becoming its own country. Not officially, of course, but it's definitely becoming more than just a place within Ukraine, and is closely resembling its own legitimate territory. But this is where the zone stands as of now. So let's see how our beloved location changes over the course of the game. Returning to the story, Skiff needs a new home, and to find that he'll need that scanner. He follows various leads that bring him to people like Squint, Solder, Diode, and Varan. Varan is where the trail pivots, as he has a job that Skiff will need to complete in order to progress. Once that finishes, he goes to meet with the prisoner he was promised to see. Down below the factory in a cell is Nestor, a guy who worked for Diode and a dead member of Noontide along with their PDA. Skiff then takes the PDA back to Diode only to run into the ward. He has a chat with Dr. Dahlin, the head of Circa, and Colonel Korshinov. Dahlin explains that the artifact in Skiff's scanner is the Alpha artifact, which when used will allow them to usher humanity into a new age. This would also lead to the removal of the zone for good. It'll be a scientific breakthrough and a miracle, and he can help them achieve that. To start, Skiff can choose to reveal the PDA he found, which will lead to both these men instructing him to go to Noontide's base on Wild Island. He'll also get a ward badge, which can help bypass checkpoints easier. If not, then he'll have to do a mission for a stalker named Mute. Mute's located near a base owned by Spark and led by Scar. Spark was initially founded by Topol, Mace, Snake, and Spirit, the same ones who helped Dr. Herman back in Call of Pripyat. Scar, however, explains that when he was a part of Spark, a shootout happened and some of the members died, which led to him leading in their stead. Spirit, however, is still alive, and will explain that this isn't exactly how it happened. There is also a note of his you could find that states that he and his group were the original Spark. Anyone claiming to be now is a fake and just using their name. So why is Scar lying? Well, a good explanation for why he is his new crazy attitude. Scar never spoke, but he seemed professional, to an extent. This Scar, however, is off the crazy pills. As we know from Clear Sky, Scar was taken by sea consciousness and brainwashed. Well, that brainwashing seems to have had an effect on him, as his main goal as the leader of Spark is to find the Shining Zone, a place where the evils of the zone are gone. He even shows a great example of that evil, as zombies arrive during the conversation. This is the kind of evil Scar wants to remove. His plan sounds a lot like Sea Consciousness's plan to rid the world of negative emotions, and that's intended. I wouldn't go as far as to say that he is currently being brainwashed as we're speaking to him, but I think his time back then did morph his feelings and thoughts on the zone to align with that of Sea Consciousness. After their talk concludes, he goes to the Noontide base on Wild Island to meet with Strider, who's currently helping his injured men after being attacked by a scanner. Strider encourages Skiff to talk to Professor Ladochka, as all the monolith PDAs can be tracked and he might know the location. He's first told to find an inductor at the waste processing station. The place has been overrun by a controller, and some mercenaries come by after Skiff leaves to clear up the mess, which includes killing leftover Noontide members. They were hired by Dubney, a member of Noontide, which doesn't make any sense, but hints at the treachery soon to follow. As upon returning to Wild Island, Strider and another member Faust are arguing over ideals. Strider is a sign of the future, while Faust is one of the past. Faust saw beauty in the Wish Granter, like some of those men in Call of Pripyat. He believes that life was better under its rule, whereas Strider sees it for the destructive device that it was. This internal conflict within Noontide spills over almost immediately, as Strider tells Skiff to head to Azimuth Station, as that's where they can track the PDAs. But upon arrival, the previously ward-guarded location has been attacked. Faust's cell of Noontide has attacked the base. This is confirmed as much when he enters, as Skiff is attacked by Foma, another member of Noontide. Dealing with him and listening to the PDA reveals that Faust really is betraying Noontide, hoping to turn them back into Monolith. This cuts deep for Strider. Not only was Faust the one who helped him found Noontide, but Foma was even one of his men we helped in Call of Pripyat. A recorded conversation on the PDA points Skiff to Camp Icarus. He informs the captain here that there is a traitor within their midst. Investigating further reveals this traitor to be Lieutenant Shaterev. According to his personal notes, he didn't believe in Faust's speeches, but over time became increasingly interested in what the man had to say. Sifting through his laptop, Skiff hears the words Clear Sky and decides to head to their base. But as we know, finding Clear Sky won't be that easy. He has to track down Nimble, who's the only one who knows how to get there. Nimble has been everywhere. He's worked with not only Sidorovich, but also Clear Sky and the Skadovsk. There isn't anywhere this man hasn't gone, and since he was at the Clear Sky base, he definitely knows how to get there. After a brief altercation, as Skiff recognizes him as the one who left him for dead in the intro, Skiff can choose to kill or spare him. Either option rewards him with a map that will instruct him on how to navigate the swamps. To get through its defenses, Skiff will have to disable some C emitters that Professor Kalandraw set up to prevent people from getting inside. These are all located near many points of interest he would have taken over during the faction war against the Renegades, like the Watchtower and Farmstead. Like all sea-related emissions, it causes some brief hallucinations to occur, which explains the mysterious enemies who appear out of thin air, only to disappear when you attempt to loot their body. Upon making it to the base, Faust is seen recounting the deaths of his men while sitting next to Skiff's scanner. Going off the messages left behind by the sea emitters, Faust seems to be confused as to why the Wish Granter abandoned him, questioning what he did to receive such silence. Faust believes that the Wish Granter's silence is a sign, to show them that just because they're alive does not mean they are happy. Faust continually mentions these feelings of happiness throughout the game. He questions if being alive like they are now will truly bring them happiness. Under the Wish Granter, all was taken care of, but now they have to think for themselves, and that's easier said than done. Strider believes that while the road ahead is tough, nothing is worse than being controlled, but Faust sees the control as a gift. Regardless, with the scanner in hand, Skiff can then head to Circa and get paid. Before that, Scar and Strider ask Skiff to be wary, as they just received word that the Wish Granter was moved from the center of the zone to Circa's headquarters. Given its intended purpose, that only means something bad, so they want Skiff to investigate and see what Circa plans to do with it. Upon meeting with Dahlin, he explains that the Alpha artifact is necessary to their goal, as it will allow them to connect to the generators remotely from Circa. The generators were briefly seen at the end of Shadow of Chernobyl. They are located in the center of the zone, and is where the pods of sea consciousness are. They hold unimaginable power, due to this place being used to tap into the noosphere. With the Alpha artifact, instead of just going there themselves, they could just control its power from right here in Circa. The Wish Granter is involved in this plan as it's being used as a test. As Dahlin says himself, that tech is from an older era. It barely functions as intended anymore, so it's no longer needed. But the Alpha artifact can power both the generators and the Wish Granter, so if it can power one, it will certainly power the other. Before that happens though, an accident broke out in one of the labs, so we need to clear that before we can get started. Looking into the problem, a spatial anomaly appeared within the lab. Following it leads Skiff to Dr. Herman. He managed to find his way back to Circa, but actually tried escaping using the anomaly. Dr. Herman is annoyed at the state of Circa, as the scanners were Herman's invention, even though Dahlin is passing it off as his own. Further saying that he's only used it to make his artifact farm, which is the process of synthesizing real artifacts from the zone into fake trinkets to be sold outside the zone. Even further saying that his only real claim to fame was botching the second Caribbean experiment. Back in 1995, an experiment was attempted on an artifact located in another hemisphere using a sea field. This created the first Alpha artifact. Dahlin had tried to use his artifact farm to make an Alpha artifact, only to return to redoing the Caribbean experiment when his initial plan failed. But this ended up failing too. Members of Spark attacked the scientist doing the experiment, which caused it to fail, leading to artifacts and anomalies appearing outside the zone. The exact thing that happened to Skiff. Skiff is extremely pissed at Dahlan for this, but is willing to bite his tongue if it means getting him a home, so he participates in their test. Skiff is to talk to the Wishgranter to see if it still has power. When he does, he sees visions of Shadow of Chernobyl's Wishgranter endings, before asking it for it to all come to an end. The Wishgranter then brainwashes Skiff into thinking that Circa and the world betrayed him, before coming to and realizing that it was just an illusion. Despite nearly killing Captain Zotov, the experiment worked. The Alpha artifact was enough to power the Wishgranter, so now they can use it properly and remote into the generators. Before that, Skiff meets with Agatha. Her role within Circa isn't known, but the art book for the game mentions that all decisions regarding the Institute's strategic development go through her. She introduces herself to Skiff by giving him a choice. Herman tried to use the anomaly to escape, but ended up getting stuck in Circa again, so now Skiff can decide what to do with him: kill or spare. Regardless of the choice, Agatha will then inform Skiff that some people are currently trying to prevent them from doing Dahlan's experiment, and that he should stop them. Who she's referring to is Strider and Noontide, who have now made their way into Circa. Should Skiff choose to side with Noontide, he and Strider will stop Dahlan from completing the experiment, before a signal is played that causes Strider to become brainwashed, while he rips out the device and storms off. If Skiff sides with the Ward, he accompanies Dahlan as they complete the experiment, before Strider attempts to stop them. He is put down by security, only to overpower them once the signal is played. Afterwards, it's learned that not just Strider, but every member of Noontide on Wild Island and outside the base has become brainwashed. Faust has just turned Noontide back into Monolith. Because of this, Skiff will have to escape the facility, as Noontide has just started warring with the Ward at Circa. Before that, he also grabs a flash drive which held Circa's archives on it, which will come in handy later. From here, the game tends to split a little, as while the main quest's basic path is the same, how you get there depends on who you side with. If you join with the Ward, then you'll meet at their base and discuss what to do next. If it's Noontide, then you'll track down the Professor again and shut down part of the signal near the Noontide base, which should prevent further brainwashing in the area, and then take that C emitter that was used and bring it to Scar. Along the way, you'll find previous locations, mainly the Sphere and Zelicia, overrun by Monolith. You can turn off the emitter at the Sphere, and you can also defend Zelicia from a Monolith assault. Should you fail to save Zelicia or just outright ignore the thing entirely, the place will be abandoned and the previous services will be unavailable. The paths that converge again, as both sides agree that assaulting the Duga is necessary. The Ward wants to prevent Monolith from holding a key position, as the Duga is a massive radar array, and Spark wants Skiff to first head to a nearby factory and install an emitter in the basement. Spark is going to use the war between the Ward and Monolith as a distraction. Spark uses the emitter and turns the Ward into zombies, while Skiff uses the Chaos to kill Faust and stop Monolith. Depending on who you side with, you're able to see one side of the conflict, either setting off the emitter and watching Ward scramble, or being in the midst of that chaos once it goes off. Both sides want Skiff to take down Faust, but he managed to make clones of himself, so killing him was impossible. Once again, both sides suggest going to STC Malachite to see if they have any knowledge on C-induced illusions. Dr. Ozerski is the one to talk to, who instructs Skiff to seek out Professor Dupalov, as he was one of the names listed on an archive pertaining to experiments on illusions. He explains he used to be a part of a controller program, but it was a failure. However, should Skiff need to battle against any illusions, he should find the files on the suppressor, which are in Lab X5. Records from the lab show that they were testing controller capabilities on their test subjects, and Faust was one of those subjects. They had somehow managed to implant him with controller abilities, which would explain how he was able to coerce people into joining his cause. As the notes mention that he didn't outright control them like what a controller might do, but appealed to them without using his powers. Such was the case with Lieutenant Shaterev, as you'll recall him not initially being on board with what Faust was talking about, only to come around by the end as he claimed that Faust was starting to sound convincing. Within these labs are also files for the suppressor. Returning to Dupalov, he is amazed to hear that the controller program worked and exactly like he thought it would. He was the one who suggested that in order to create a proper host, they needed to have their ability to think remain intact, unlike controllers who are quite mindless. With the plans in hand, Skiff can now attach the suppressor to his armor, which will allow him to suppress Faust's abilities. Now it is time to assault the Duga. Either with the Ward or with Spark, Skiff will attack the Duga, blow up the radar array, and confront Faust. As he dies, Skiff is then sent into some kind of dream-like realm where he gets a one-on-one conversation with Faust. Like before, he discusses the feelings of happiness, claiming that simply being alive is not enough to be happy. The Wishgranter gave him that happiness, and all he's ever wanted to do is return to it. Unfortunately, his time has been cut short. He recognizes that we are an envoy of the Wishgranter. He must have done something to anger it, that's why Skiff was sent here by the Wishgranter to kill him. Obviously, that didn't happen. If anything sent Skiff here, it's his desire for a new house. He then shows Skiff what the Wishgranter showed him. What he sees is the real zone, or at least how Faust perceives it. He then encourages Skiff to understand his definition of the zone, likely a hint of the multiple choices and endings we'll go over soon. With Faust dead, that means the leader is no more, even though Monolith is still brainwashed. On his neck is a necklace which you could plug it to a device at STC Malachite and talk to a representative of C Consciousness. According to the representative, while Strelok did destroy C Consciousness back in 2012, they were able to live on in the noosphere in the form of subtle matter. Depending on who you side with, you are either here with Dahlan or Scar. For Scar, this is exactly what he was looking for, another step in his plan to find the Shining Zone, something the representative also wants to make true. For Dahlan, this is a moment of confliction. Dahlan's father was one of the 7 C Consciousness scientists, so if subtle matter is real, that means his father is alive. The Colonel doesn't care, seeing it is nothing more than just an illusion. He'll also kill Dr. Ozerski as he worked with Spark to make sure those emitters went off at the Duga, which subsequently killed many of the Colonel's men. Both conversations are cut short as the opposite factions raid the base. Spark attacks if you side with the Ward, and the Ward if you sided with Spark. Once the chaos dies down, each tells you to meet with Strelok. Scar wants to find the X network where all the Visiographs are located, devices which are related to the Shining Zone. And the Colonel needs to find a way to the generators on foot, since remoting in didn't work as we saw back at Circa, and Strelok would know how to get there. But naturally, Strelok is a hard man to find. Worse, we also know that Fang and Ghost are dead, so they won't be of much use. Our only lead is the Doctor. Through his investigation, Skiff manages to track down the Doctor to this large dome in the Red Forest. At his doorstep is Strider, who is brainwashed into attacking the Doctor. He had killed a few mercenaries who you'll meet earlier. They were used as bait to get the Doctor out of hiding, as the Doctor is known to always come to those in need. Before he can ask about Strelok, the Doctor wants him to pick up a regenerator. Strider's injuries are severe, but Monolith soldiers use regenerators to heal their wounds. Once he returns with it, Strider is seen attacking the Doctor before being killed. The Doctor didn't want to kill him, but he had to make a choice, and it was not an easy one. The Doctor then talks about the past, talking about how the zone is a zone of destruction because the people made it that way. He uses the dogs in his home as an example. The blind dogs behind him were made in labs. They were fearful of the scientists, so all they ever know is fear. Contrast this with Tiger, a mutant dog of his who just showed up one day and asked for food. Tiger had the freedom to choose, while the other dogs did not. He envisions then a different kind of zone, one not bound by the constraints of the people who harness its power. That's when he reveals that he is the 8th scientist of C Consciousness, Dr. Kaimanov. He, like his peers, wanted to harness the power of the noosphere, but he bailed last minute because he disagreed with their methods. They wanted to remove the negative feelings of the world and create the Shining Zone, whereas Kaimanov believed that humanity should always be able to choose for themselves, further saying that these aspects of humanity are what make people human. Among the many things said in the conversation, Skiff mentions subtle matter, a theory he should be quite familiar with. To him, though, he never believed it, considering it unscientific, but isn't willing to completely disregard the possibility of its existence. He asks us to test the theory again at Orbita, but to do that we'll need a visiograph to do it. A trader at the Cordon will know where it is, and you could probably guess who that trader is. Sidorovich, like always, has our info, but won't give it out for free. Just like old times, he's got a job that needs taken care of, and it's back at the old factory, just like our first mission in Heart of Chernobyl. Once that's cleared up, he mentions that the X3 lab is also the Oasis. Apparently, the Oasis in Call of Pripyat isn't the only Oasis. Talking with some stalkers around the camp, we are pointed towards a man named Dark. Dark wants to get to the Oasis, so Skiff will have to work with him and get inside. Once there, they make it to the central control room before dozens of TVs come on, causing Dark to seize, before Strelok comes by and takes them both down. Strelok shows Skiff a PDA that looks eerily familiar to the one we saw in Heart of Chernobyl. Dark was an agent of C Consciousness who was still operating on the old mission of killing Strelok. That's likely why he came here in the first place. Even though the conversation does start a bit hostile, the two manage to talk about C Consciousness, subtle matter, and the Shining Zone. Strelok claims that all of it is a lie. The Visiographs, the Representative, the Wishgranter, the Shining Zone, nothing more than an illusion. To prove it, he tells Skiff to go see it for himself. Behind him is a ladder that takes him to an untouched section of the zone. It's surprisingly beautiful. There are no anomalies, mutants, nothing, and the plants are healthy. But remove the Visiograph and you'll see what it really looks like. Strelok said that after he destroyed C Consciousness, he briefly saw the Shining Zone, which was like the cutscene we saw at the end of Heart of Chernobyl. Afterwards, he tried to search for it but realized it was fake, and that none of it was real. After that, he vowed to stop the people from using the zone for their selfish needs. So as opposed to back in Call of Pripyat where he wanted to destroy the zone, now in Heart of Chernobyl he wants the zone to be left alone, kept away from outside influences that would seek to harm and control it. With the visiograph in hand though, Skiff can now go to a place called Orbita to see if this subtle matter is real. Upon putting in the device and stepping into the pod, Skiff meets with Strider. The two talk about the raid on Circa and you're free to tell him the truth about what happened back there. The point of this conversation is that you can make an informed decision in just a few moments, as Scar will come by to talk to Skiff about what he saw, only for the game to ask you to pick a side. Should you side with Spark, that means you believe in the Shining Zone, and that Strata was alive talking with you from within the Noosphere. Should you disagree and see it as nothing more than an illusion, you become the enemy of Spark. Regardless of your choice, you are then told by Strelok to head to a nearby facility to find info on the Stalker program, as it contains the heart of the X network. Skiff then finds info on a Project Fiber, which was somehow able to implant a camera in the eyes of agents, as seen by Strelok conversing with Skiff through Dark's eyes. Strelok, with Skiff's help, then learns that the Stalker program is located within Pripyat, meaning we'll have to talk to Degtyrev. As he escapes the facility, the Ward along with the Colonel subdue Skiff. From here you'll have to make another choice, side with the Ward or not. If you do, then you lock them in for the ending. If not, then they are your enemy. Regardless of your decision, Pripyat is the next destination. Getting there is going to be troublesome, as Degtyrev has walled off the only entrance into Pripyat, and Skiff can only get in if he has proper authorization. This forces him to look into the whereabouts of Spirit, one of the original leaders of Spark, who claims to know a way inside. Through him, Skiff finds a scanner that he can either use to destroy some anomalies in a tunnel, allowing for safe passage into the city, or he can pawn it off to one of the men at Yanov Station, who will let him inside in return. Once inside, Skiff meets with Degtyrev. As we discussed earlier, the Major, now Colonel Degtyrev, insisted on returning to Pripyat, and for the past decade has continued to put the pressure on Monolith, but he is definitely struggling. Like the other Colonel said back in Call of Pripyat, the situation is dire. They don't have nearly as much manpower as Monolith, and they're running out of supplies. Skiff only cares about the Stalker program though, and to get there he'll have to go underground. If Skiff is allied with Spark or the Ward, he'll have to go through their channels in order to find out how to get underground. If he sided with Strelok, then Degtyrev gives you some leads on where to start. To find the underground area known as the Foundation, Skiff will need to either go to a nearby laundromat to find documents on Operation Fairway, or a movie theater that might have blueprints on old military installations. Either option provides Skiff with two entrances into the underground, either a cafe or a hotel. This then begins the point of no return. If you sided with Spark or Strelok, then Richter or Degtyrev will ambush a security room. Inside, they'll listen in on a conversation between Dallin and the Colonel. Dallin has become more and more skeptical about the Shining Zone. He wants to make sure it's real, as it will allow him to see his father. Dallin ends up betraying the Colonel and the Ward, allowing Skiff and his allies to get inside and take the Ward down, including the Colonel. If you sided with the Ward, then you're on the receiving end of the ambush, and have to fight off Spark and Richter. Next is what happens to the core of the C-Consciousness representative. Dallin will talk to the representative, trying to confirm that it really is his father. Dallin asks it a bunch of questions only his father would know about, but it doesn't respond. Eventually, Dallin decides that enough is enough and rips out the core. In Strelok's ending, the representative doesn't respond in time, as Skiff and Dallin rip out the core. In Spark's ending, it has just enough time to speak to Dallin, convincing him that his father is alive and real. If you're with the Ward, then you'll kill Dallin for betraying you, remove the core, and then replace it with one that sees Agatha taking over the roles of the representative, giving her complete access to the X network and all the C-Consciousness projects. The person replacing the core is Dr. Herman, who will survive regardless of whether you kill them or not, due to him being too valuable to the goals of Circa. All factions then discuss how to get to the generators and who should be the mediator. Since Kaimonov never entered his pod, if someone could get inside, that person will have all the information from the Noosphere flow through them, allowing them to tap into the Noosphere and enact whatever plan that faction has in mind. These mediators are Strelok, Scar, Colonel Korshinov, or Skiff depending on the ending. With that established, each faction heads to the generators, although Strelok wants Skiff to take a detour and take care of Dr. Kaimonov beforehand. Strelok wants all the threats to the zone quelled, and Kaimonov has his own motives for the zone, so their interests conflict. If you shoot him, then you continue Strelok's ending, but if you're willing to hear him out, then you'll get another ending. All endings lead to the generators. Escorting him to the generators is Richter. Richter's been in the background all game, always showing up in places we visit and always being the guy we turn to. Richter is a guide, but during one of his trips he got a few people killed. That memory has haunted him ever since. He felt like the zone betrayed him. Through Skiff, he is able to be the true guide he always wanted to be, able to guide people whenever and wherever they want. Through Skiff, he is able to seek forgiveness from the zone. Once he makes it to the Red Fortress, Skiff will then have to battle the forces of Monolith. He'll then come across Strelok. If he isn't allied with him, then Skiff will have to kill him. Strelok owes the zone for what it did. It gave him a new life, and he's willing to give that back to it. He sees himself as the zone's only possible protector, as no one truly knows what it wants but him. To be fair, he was the only one to get to the center and see the zone for what it really is. Later on, Skiff will then meet with Scar right where his next life began at the end of Clear Sky. Same as before, if you're an ally then all is good, if not then you'll have to fight. Scar is such a tragic character, simply for this one line where he questions if it was all worth it. Scar endured hardship at the hands of Sea Consciousness. He, Strelok, and everyone here were tortured. This fundamentally changed him. He needed the Shining Zone to be real. Not just wants, but needs it to be real. Otherwise, everyone who died here would have died for nothing. If the Shining Zone is real, then all this meaningless death will have meaning. He's desperate, a man tortured beyond belief trying to find meaning in a meaningless experiment, and I can't help but feel sad for him. Once that's done, all Skiff needs to do is confront the Granite Squad, the first ever members of Monolith, before making it to the pods of Sea Consciousness. From here, the endings play out. If you sided with the Ward, then Colonel Korshunov gets into the pod. Skiff collapses, but as he awakes, Agatha is here along with some soldiers of the Ward. Thanks to Skiff, the world has been given a brighter, better future. Agatha gives Skiff the choice of continuing to serve under the Ward or taking the key to his new home. As Skiff leaves on a helicopter home, a screen is shown through the eyes of Skiff, much like Dark earlier. Possibly implying that Skiff is simply a tool for the Ward, and the few hundred screens could imply that he's not the only one. One thing for certain is that the zone is gone. If Skiff sides with Spark, Scar goes inside the pod, and the Shining Zone comes true. Skiff wakes up in a flowerbed similar to Strelok, before meeting with Scar, Richter, and the other members of Spark. The Shining Zone came true, and all the world's problems are gone. It even healed the wound on Richter's head. The group then talks and relaxes, before the game cuts to reality, showing that it truly was just a fantasy. As for Strelok, he goes into the pod and assumes control over the zone. All checkpoints in the zone have been destroyed. Monolith now serves as the zone's guards, and no one is allowed in or out of the zone. While threats to the zone likely still remain, over time this should allow the zone to simply exist, without any outside threats or influences plaguing it. The final ending sees Skiff going into the pod. If you heard Dr. Kaimonov out, then you'll go into his office and find some documents of his. Some are diary entries that detail his occasional meetings with Strelok back in the day, along with a visiograph that shows him at the generator shooting the Sea Consciousness pods, inadvertently creating the second explosion in 2006 and the creation of the zone. These notes and flashbacks influence Skiff, as when he steps into the pod, he lets the zone choose for itself. Sea Consciousness mentioned that they were halting the zone's expansion, but now that nothing is standing in its way, it seems like the zone is finally able to choose what it wanted to do, and that answer was for it to expand past its current borders. Anomalies have been sighted all over the world, possibly implying that the world has now become the zone. It then ends with Dr. Kaimonov briefly appearing, having survived his encounter with the emission, only for the game to reveal that the doctor was Faust. Even after beating the game, I'm not sure what to make of the reveal. This would imply that Faust was the doctor, but for how long? We saw him back in Shadow of Chernobyl, and I still don't believe that Faust was playing this con this long, especially since he was a part of Monolith at the time. My assumption is that this happened recently within the events of the game, but the question still remains, why? Well, there is a possibility that Skiff was inadvertently working for Faust and the Doctor the whole time. The evidence for this comes from a document titled Project Y. It has numerous events from the main quest written down. It mentions Nestor and the scanners, one of the guys Skiff was chasing at the beginning of the game. But it also mentions the Alpha artifacts and how they will provide them, since they have quite a number of them. It's almost as if the events of the game were specifically planned out. Either way, it's still something I can't make heads or tails of, but that doesn't mean it won't ever be answered. As well, this does finally bring us to the end of Stalker. Stalker 2 is set to have 2 DLCs released at some point post-launch, something the series actually hasn't had before. So there is a chance that some questions can become answers. For now though, we shall leave it at that, but don't think our time with any radioactive wastelands has come to an end. Stalker might be over, but the next video will be on a game with an equally irradiated location, one that is a bit larger than the zone, and one that's ranked among some of my favorite games of all time. But we'll save that for another time. Thank you all for watching today, and I hope you enjoyed. Like the video if you did, and subscribe if you're new for more content like this. Feel free to check out my other story-related content if that interests you. Thank you to the patrons for your continued support, and if you'd like to contribute, you can also donate for as little as $1 a month with the link in the description. And a huge thank you to my returning viewers for coming back to another video. Take care everyone. Goodbye.